Hey gang, good morning, or should I say bonjour. I'm actually not in France at the time when I'm recording this. We leave for France tomorrow. Yeah, this is the first of two things that you have to do for me this week, which is to watch this video. The second will be the exam on Thursday. I think I've explained everything about the exam thus far. The exam will post on Wednesday, September. Let me make sure I give you the right date. I'm almost certain that it is. iPads are slow. Yes, the exam will post at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, September 30th. It will be due on Thursday, October 1st at 11:59 p.m. Once you open the file on Blackboard, you will have 75 minutes to complete the exam. You will get when the exam posts to Blackboard, you will get an email reminder. And if you have any questions, remember, I won't be checking my phone. I won't be checking text. The best way to get me is to email me, bshelley@vcu.edu, and I will make sure that I check my emails as often as possible during exam day, okay? So with that, let's move into the topic for today, which is writing. And how you write for the social sciences. I generally think that this is one of the more useful lectures, useful at least to you guys, that I give this semester, okay? Because a lot of you will never do hardcore statistics research, and you may never do experiments or anything like that. But all of us at some point are going to have to write something in a social science fashion. Even if it's just, you're writing an essay for me for class, you need to know sort of the type of writing that I expect. And what I expect is in line with the standards of political science and social science more generally. Okay? On the topic of the course, writing your results up is a key part of the research process. Since if you have all these cool findings that we're going to talk about throughout the semester, they're not really all that good unless you can communicate them to the outside world. And at least today and in the past, the primary way that we communicate that is through writing. There's an expectation in all the social science departments that your writing displays certain features. And so what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about both how the prose should look at your paper, or I'm going to talk about three things actually. How the prose, the words should look on your paper, what kind of sentences should you strive for, that kinds of things. Two, I'm going to talk about if you ever do have to write a full research report, like a full 25-page research report, what are the sections there? And then three, I'm going to expand a little bit on one of the sections of the formal research report, which is the lit review. So let's first talk about how your sentences should look, what your prose should look like, okay? What counts as good writing varies by the audience that you're trying to reach, okay? The easiest way to think about this is that if you were writing an email to me versus an email that you would write to your friends, right? You're probably going to be more careful with the email that you send to me. You're probably going to be less likely to like put emojis and LOLs and stuff, even though I use those things all the time, into your emails. That is true more generally when you sit down to formally do some writing, okay? You would write a novel differently than you'd write a poem, differently than you'd write a social science essay, okay? The type of writing that I'm going to speak to is the third one there, the social science essay. That's what is expected in all the social science departments at VCU and any of the institutions I've taught at. They are the standards that I'm going to hold you to. All right. If there's one word that sort of encapsulates everything about writing that I'm going to tell you today, it is focus. We want our writing to be as focused as possible on the main points that we need to communicate. We want to be as clear as we possibly can in communicating our main points, and we also want to be as concise as possible. All right? Accuracy and precision are very valued here. All right? The way that I always describe this with an in-class example is that when you're writing for social science, you should strive to make your writing look like Ernest Hemingway's. A lot of us read in high school, particularly if we're in the United States, we read Ernest Hemingway, stuff like The Sun Also Rises and The Old Man and the Sea. And if you remember anything about Hemingway, his books are really short. His sentences are really short. He once did a poem that was like one sentence, which was something like, the man puffed on his cigarette as the general gave the order to the firing squad, right? One sentence that is tremendously evocative. That is kind of what we're striving for in social science. We want to say what we need to say as clearly and with as few words as possible, all right? The reason that we do this is because, look, the stuff that we're going to talk about, that we've already talked about, poverty, what is the best way to run a public education system? You know, what should the United States policy be with regard to ISIS? These are tremendously complicated ideas. The ideas are complicated. We want to, therefore, communicate them as simply as possible so that everybody can understand that. All right? Some practical points about what this means. And this draws on your Mannheim and Rich chapter a lot. I think that that's a very good one. You want to, they have a point in there that you shouldn't overstate a point, right? And this goes back to the idea in social science, we don't really prove anything. We just suggest things. So you do not want to come in and say to me on your exam next week, you want to say that experiments are always the most superior way to conduct social science research, right? That's overstating the point. If you really understand experiments, what you would communicate is that experiments are often useful, but circumstances sometimes dictate that we need to use other methods, okay? We want to make sure that we only say in writing those things that we have actually proven or actually shown or actually confident of. We don't want to go overboard and claim things that we can't. Another way to think about this might be when you're writing things up, always remember the rules of operationalization, right? And always remember that there is always going to be some gap between the measures you use and the concept that you're trying to speak to. When we write things up in social science, we have to be conscious that all we've really seen is change in the measures, right? That may suggest some things about the overlying concept, about the concept at the top here, right? But remember that concept is very big. Probably one measure doesn't completely capture it. So you want to be careful, all right? Another rule for writing. There's no suspense in social science writing. And I always like this one because this is something that I struggled with. I always want to, kind of like a novel. When I was an undergraduate, my idea was like, okay, I'm going to lay this out. I'm going to tell this epic story. And at the end, it's all going to unfold to people. It's not what we do in social science write-ups, okay? Social science, we don't care about developing a story necessarily. What we care is communicating the main ideas. There's an old saying that applies to writings, that applies to writing in the social sciences, which is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. All right? All of your writing should always have a thesis statement. Your thesis statement is a sentence at the beginning of the essay, usually in the first or second paragraph, that basically describes the entire argument of the of what you're about to write. Okay. Now, sometimes in longer pieces, like when I write a 25-page research paper or something like that, I won't have a thesis statement because 25 pages, it's impossible to do justice to the entire argument. So in that case, usually I'll have a thesis paragraph, and a lot of times that ends up actually being the abstract. If you've ever looked at social science research, you know that there's an abstract that is basically a summary of everything that is told there, just like a thesis statement. In shorter pieces, like for the exam that you guys are going to do, now let me take that back. You can have a thesis sentence if you'd like in the essays that you're going to do for the exam. Okay. After you write the thesis, let's say you're writing a 5-page paper. You have your introduction, you have your thesis statement, then you develop the argument presented in the thesis statement throughout the rest of the paper, throughout the body of the paper, right? So really, you're telling people what the argument is in the first paragraph or two, and then you're explaining what you mean in the next 3 pages. Then at the end, in the conclusion, always restate your thesis statement, right? Again, the reason that we do this is that we want to keep telling people what the main points are, because look, even if we hit them over the head 3 times, maybe some people only get it the 3rd time that we tell them, right? And all that we care about in social science research is simple communication, all we care about in social science writing is simple communication of the ideas at play, okay? Remember, when we talk about what kind of language you want Hemingway. That means don't try to sound smart with big words, all right? Big words have their place, but only when smaller words won't do it. So you never need to use in social science, I don't think, the word parsimonious, right? There's a synonym for that. It's short. Parsimonious means short, all right? Sorry, mind blank, guys. My mouth is running faster than my brain. What do I want to say? Parsimonious and short. Both of them express basically the same idea, right? However, one of them, parsimonious, some people may not know what the heck that means, right? And that distracts people from what you want to try to do, which is clearly and effectively communicate the idea in question. Short, everybody knows what short is, so just say short, all right? You don't need adverbs in social science, in social science writing, right? Usually. So you don't need to say I'll just leave it at that. We don't need adverbs. Sorry, it's a little early and my mind's racing with coffee. Some of these example falls are. Generally, you keep it simple and you can't go wrong. All right? So that is how the prose should look on the paper. Let's talk for a second about the sections of a formal social science research report. I'll tell you right now, these are not going to go on any exam that I'm going to give you. I provide them for you, and I have you read the Mannheim and Rich section for them, because I know that some of you may get into seminars later in your academic career, either at VCU or if you go to graduate school, where you're going to need to write longer research projects. This is particularly true if you want to be a professor. This is the description of the kind of stuff that I have to do, all right? So there are 6 sections of the formal research paper. First section is an introduction. This is like countless introductions that you've done before in your life. At the end of it, the reader should know what the research question is, what the key relationship in your paper is that you're testing. The reader should know your hypothesis. When you have results of original research, you should describe them in the introduction. And that's what goes in the introduction. The second thing that you need in your research is in the full research report is you need a definition of the key concepts and hypotheses. So in this case, if we were doing a research paper on poverty, you would say, I describe poverty as the number of people who live below the federal definition of poverty, which is based on household income. Okay, you want to describe the concepts you're looking at. In other words, so that we all know so that the reader knows sort of like, okay, when you say you're talking about poverty, this is what you mean, all right? Just to build some shared understanding that you can use throughout the rest of the paper. Okay, the third thing that you need to do is the literature review, which I'm going to talk about in a second at the end of all this, all right? The fourth thing that you need is a methodology section. I'm not going to talk too much about this one either, but because this is what we talk about throughout the rest of the semester, like how you do these methods. Just know that in the methodology section, if you're doing original research, this is where you describe everything about how you did your research, okay? So, if you have an operational definition that says like, okay, how am I going to measure poverty? You put your operational definition in there. If your research method was to go out and interview people or do a Fenno-style participant observation, soak and poke, right? You describe everything that you did with that soak and poke. If you did statistical methodology, you describe your statistics and all the different things that you did. The reason that it's so important to describe your methodology in a piece of original social science research writing is because of replication. Replication is the idea that anyone can go back at any time, read the methodology section that on a paper that I write, say, and they should be able to replicate the study and get the same results that I did. So ideally, in the methodology write-up section, I want to tell people, let's say I'm doing a statistical paper. I want to tell people like, okay, this is my definition of the key concepts. This is the data set that I used. These are the statistical methods that I used. These are the control variables, all these types of things, right? Let's say that somebody looks at my conclusions and say, Shelley, he's full of shit. I can't trust anything that he says. They can go back and they can say, okay, I'm going to define poverty the same way that he did. I'm going to look at I'm going to pull the same data that he did. I'm going to do the same statistical stuff. And I'm going to run the same statistical stuff. If I, as a social science researcher and as a writer, have accurately communicated what I did, that person should be able to replicate the results that I did. This is so important because this is the way that we can start to show that we're not just lying, that we actually did something that was kind of objective. It's also important because let's say that you look at the way that I've done my study of poverty and you look at my methodology and you go, oh, this is why I think Shelley's conclusions are wrong because he researched it the wrong way. I would have researched it this way. Well, now you can go back and research it the other way. If you find something different from me, okay, then we need to have a discussion about, okay, whose research do we think is more credible? Whose research do we think is more valid here? If we both agree on the same thing, if you do your study you do your study your way, and I do my study my way, and we arrive at the same conclusion, well, that's pretty powerful evidence, right, that we're on to something. So that's all I have to say about that. The next thing that you need to do is write up the research itself. You need to present your findings. So we'll call this section findings, right? This is where you describe the most important results that you saw in your research. You don't have to include every single thing. Otherwise, you'd be writing forever, right? You're going to highlight the most important findings that you had, the findings that are most relevant to your thesis, to your central research question. You clearly always have an obligation to disclose the most important findings, whether you agree with them or not. So if I found that Obamacare was destroying the country in my research project, even though I love Obama, I have an obligation to report that because my personal beliefs shouldn't factor into much, okay? The last thing that you write up is a conclusion, and that is just the section where you basically summarize. Again, the conclusion, tell them what you told them. you summarize your thesis statement, you summarize your research, you restate all that stuff. Maybe also in the conclusion, I will sometimes talk about, oh, okay, this is my research. Based on these findings, here's what I think it means. I kind of interpret it from, I try to talk about sort of like, okay, this is future research we could do. This is what I think it means for the big concept that I care about, and so on and so forth. Those are the formal sections of the lit review. Or I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Those are the 6 formal sections of the research paper. All right. Now, let's talk about lit reviews. This is the section number 3 in the research project that you have, or in the research write-up that I've just described. It's also something that you guys are going to have to do fairly often. So as undergraduates, one of the things that you might have to do is your teacher might say, your professor, your teacher, whatever, might say, okay, write a paper comparing 3 books on the syllabus. Okay? Well, they're basically asking you to write a lit review. All right? When we talk, so the concepts that you'll hear me talk about for the lit review here are also, I think, going to be really applicable when you go to write papers at VCU. When we talk about the lit review in the context of the broader research paper as the 3rd step in that process I just laid out, the first thing that a lit review does is it establishes a context for the reader to let them better understand why you're doing the research and what other people have said before. Okay? So the lit review is just basically you are summarizing what other people have already researched and found and written about this topic. Okay? So if I'm doing a study of poverty in the Richmond area, my lit review is going to describe all previous social science studies of poverty in the Richmond area, what people have said before. We do this for a couple of reasons, the most important of which is that it helps the reader understand what your unique contribution is. We don't want to do research that's already been done, right? Always in research, we want to answer new questions. So we provide a summary of what the old or of what previous research was. One, so we as the researchers don't duplicate the efforts that people have already had. And 2, because we want the reader to understand that we are part of a broader debate here. The idea of social science research is that it's a cumulative body of knowledge. So when I do my research on education policy, you probably heard of the phrase standing on the shoulder of giants. That's absolutely what every researcher does. When I do research on education policy, what has come before me, the researchers that have come before me, have provided the foundation for me to ask new, hopefully more advanced, hopefully slightly different questions. Then, let's say in 10 years from now, you're the professor, you're doing research on education policy. If I have done my job right, you can build on what I've written to go even higher and higher, right? Again, the lit review helps us locate our research project within the broader social science literature, and in doing so, helps contribute to the idea that social science research is always progressing, always getting better. We're always learning as a society new things. All right. You want the lit review talking about more nuts and bolts stuff. All right. You want the lit review to be a comprehensive summary of the literature relevant to your topic. All right. It doesn't mean that you don't have to include every piece of literature on your topic. So if I'm doing that study of Richmond poverty, I don't have to put in all, let's make a number up, 5,000 studies of poverty in the Richmond area, right? What I need to do is I need to provide a summary of the main themes in those literatures, all right? So if 100 studies all basically say that poverty is a particular problem among the African American community in the Richmond area. I can basically describe all 100 of those in one paragraph, right? Or maybe 2 paragraphs or something like that. That's not to minimize the importance of that point or of the individual studies that got us to that point. But the idea is that the Lit Review is a comprehensive summary of the most important things that people have found. It doesn't attempt to be exhaustive, all right? This all raises a question. Which literature are we talking about? When we're talking about a literature review, we're not talking about what newspaper have written about things. We're not talking about media. We're not talking about, punditry or talking head shows or columns or anything like that, right? We're talking about serious academic citations. When I say serious academic citations, what I'm talking about are things that adhere as closely as possible to the rules of good social science research. These are the rules that you're learning in this class. So one of the things that I hope that you're able to do in this class is that I hope that when we get done with this class, when you read a piece of social science research that purports to give facts about social life in the world, I hope that you're able to look at the research methods and go, oh, this guy actually is full of crap. Like his measures don't support his measures are not completely valid operationalizations of the concepts that he care about, and yet he's making all these grandiose points, right? We want the literature to adhere to the rules of social science as we understand them, okay? And as you're learning in this class. Shortcut, all right? So that you don't have to identify everything. We're generally talking about, for inclusion in the Lit Review, I'm going to say 3 types of sources. 1, articles from peer-reviewed journals, all right? Peer review is generally the highest standard of social science research. What peer review means is that I do an article, or if I do an article manuscript on public education, I will send it off to a journal. The journal will have it reviewed by other experts in public education. This is where the peer review comes. And we think if we think that I usually find that I get reviewed by 3 people, right? And the editor. So I guess that's 4 people. These are 4 people who know my field very, very well, right? Who are probably as good or better researchers than I am. If they say that it's valid, that this is important social science research, then that's probably a pretty good indication that, yeah, okay, this kid's onto something, let's print it, all right? So peer-reviewed academic journals. Second one, books that appear on scholarly presses. So this is, sometimes you'll see a book assigned and you'll see that it's published by Harvard University Press or, University of Nebraska Press or something like that. Academic presses are generally thought to rival the quality of peer review. There's also a peer review process that goes with that. So those are generally accepted as valid academic sources, valid social science research sources. The third place that you can cite are reports from non-academic research organizations, but you have to be careful there, right? Because there are a lot of organizations out there that will present themselves as reputable social science research organizations that actually, when you look more into it, don't cut mustard, all right? Anytime you want to cite something from like a think tank or something like that, it is necessary to go in and examine the research methodology with a critical eye towards determining whether or not this does seem to offer it does seem to follow the rules of social science, right? So think tank reports aren't always safe as literature to cite if you're doing a research project, but peer-reviewed academic journal articles and peer-reviewed academic journal articles and scholarly books are also worth doing, okay? Generally, as real shorthand, anything that you can find in the VCU library card catalog or the VCU library search area, right? If you find an article in there and you can get and so this is on my syllabus for this class, you will see some things that say access through JSTOR. I'm not even going to explain JSTOR, but really all you need to do is you need to take the name of that article, put it into the VCU library search function for the, we used to call it the card catalog. I don't know what they call it now. All right. But I think you guys know what I mean. I'll show it to you next time we're in class, right? You put that article title in there, you plop it in there, you hit return. All right. That will bring you to articles, anything that you put in there and VCU spits back out to you. That's generally going to be admissible if you ever have to write a lit review or a research project. Okay. Side note, when you go in through the VCU library to get at some of those articles, you're going to have to make sure that you're established on the VCU network, which may mean that you establish something called a VPN network. You might not actually need to do that now that I think about it. As long as you can enter your name, your email name and password, you should be able to get at all the articles. So that's probably the best way to do it. All right. The other thing that I want to tell you about lit reviews is when you need to cite something. You need to cite something, not just when you directly quote a book, all right? You need to cite when you take an idea from a book, an article, whatever. So, for example, right, let's say I got this thing right here, all right? The ProAd Catalog of Assessments. And here we go, something called and I'm taking things out of Newware, right? As you can see here, right? There's a description for the Real 3 test, all right? If I look at this and I am reading this and I say, oh gosh, this tells me some information that I need, or this has a provocative thesis or something like that, or anything, any idea that I have when I'm reading this that can be directly attributed to this summary right here, if I use that in my own writing, even if I change the words, even if I make the wording my own, I need to cite, okay? When in doubt, cite something. When in doubt, give credit to another author. You can never get in trouble by citing something, all right? You can get in big trouble if you take somebody else's idea and put it as your own, right? This goes to the discussion that I had about the honor code earlier in the semester with VCU, right? So you know that on my exams, you are not at all allowed to take any information from outside sources and basically copy and paste it, right? Where was I going with that? It's always a good idea, right? If in doubt, cite it. If you take an idea for somebody, or you think that you may have taken an idea from somebody, cite it. Okay? That's it. And we're not going to get into different ways that you construct citations because I don't have you do a research paper in this class, and you're not going to have to do citations. And that will generally vary with the individual professor or place that you're trying to write for. But that's really all I have for you. And yeah, exam will post Thursday. Any questions, email me. Bye, guys.